Sometimes it only takes one quiet act, something as simple as giving up your coat, to change everything. In this town, where nothing much ever seems to happen, a single moment on a snowy sidewalk sets off a chain of events no one could have predicted. Not the father trying to hold his world together, and certainly not the woman watching from across the street. What happens when kindness crosses paths with someone powerful? But hiding. This is not a story about wealth. It's not even a story about chance. It's a story about hearts. Broken, mended, and brave enough to hope again. So before we begin, if you love stories that restore your faith in people, that feel like a warm fire on a cold night, consider subscribing. We tell true-to-heart stories every week, filled with meaning, emotion, and a touch of the unexpected. Now, let me take you to Halston Ridge. Struggling single dad sold his only jacket for his twins' milk. The CEO watching asked to marry him. The cold came early that year. It settled in like a silent visitor, seeping through the windows of old homes, curling under doorways and lingering on the breath of every soul in the small mountain town of Halston Ridge. Snow had fallen steadily for 3 days now, turning roads to glass and rooftops into frosted cakes. But the beauty of it was lost on Liam Carter. He tightened his grip on Ellie's mittened hand and shifted his son, Finn, higher on his hip. The little boy's cheek was red from the wind, his eyelids fluttering sleepily against Liam's shoulder. The three of them trudged through the snow along the sidewalk. Liam in worn boots and a once handsome leather jacket now dulled and scuffed by time. It was the only one he owned, and today he would sell it. The thrift shop's bell jingled as they stepped inside, bringing a swirl of snow with them. Heat washed over them, thick and dry, as the smell of old books and cinnamon wrapped around them like a blanket. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Halberd, the store's gray-haired owner who'd known Liam since he was a boy. Her eyes drifted down to the twins, then to the jacket Liam slowly removed. "You sure, Liam?" she asked, folding her hands over the counter. He hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "They're out of milk. This'll buy enough to get us through the weekend." Mrs. Halberd sighed and took the jacket. "I'll give you 20 for it, and this." She reached behind her and handed him a thick scarf, soft and blue. "You'll freeze without something." Liam took it with a grateful smile, but his eyes stung. "Daddy," Ellie whispered, tugging on his sleeve, "isn't that your favorite coat?" He crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "It was," he said gently, "but you and Finn are my favorites now." Outside, a woman watched from a black SUV parked across the street. She wasn't from around here. That much was obvious. The car was too clean, too new, and the woman inside too poised. Evelyn Whitmore, founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing organic food empires in the country, had only stopped in Halston Ridge to fuel up and get coffee. Her driver was inside paying. She remained in the vehicle, sipping from a paper cup, letting the heat from the vents bathe her face. She didn't intend to notice him. But there he was, a man with eyes the color of November and the weight of the world resting between his shoulders. She watched the exchange through the shop's front window. She couldn't hear words, but she saw everything that mattered. The tenderness in the father's expression, the quiet resignation in the storekeeper's face, the little girl's concern, the way the man smiled for her anyway. She didn't know his name, but something inside her stirred. Inside the store, Liam bought a half-gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, and 2 apples. It left him with $3, which he slipped into the donation jar on the counter with a quiet nod. He wrapped the scarf around his neck, hoisted Finn back onto his hip, and took Ellie's hand once more. Outside, the wind cut hard across the street. Evelyn watched as he paused at the corner, kneeling in the snow to adjust Finn's cap and whisper something to Ellie that made her giggle. Then, standing tall against the swirling cold, he walked on. The three of them disappearing around the bend, swallowed by white. That night, Evelyn couldn't shake the image. She lay in her rental cabin, surrounded by silence and firelight, and stared into her glass of untouched wine. The fireplace crackled. Her phone buzzed. Emails, calendar reminders, a message from her assistant reminding her of a Zoom meeting she would likely now cancel. She turned the screen face down. In a world where she could buy anything, she had never seen a man give away something so precious for so little, and never with such quiet strength. Her company had taught her to measure value in margins, metrics, quarterly gains. But today she'd seen a different kind of currency, and it stayed with her like the chill in her bones. She reached for her leather-bound journal, something she hadn't opened in months, and wrote, "He sold his coat for milk. I think I just saw the kindest man alive." Across town, Liam laid the twins in their shared bed, tucking the thick quilt around them and kissing their foreheads. Finn clutched his stuffed lion. Ellie whispered something about angels keeping them warm. Liam only smiled, brushing her hair back. He stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the nearly empty fridge now graced with milk and bread. He poured a glass for each child, set it beside their pillows, and watched them sleep. His arms ached. His back hurt. His hands were still raw from the cold. But the fridge wasn't empty, and neither was his heart. Somewhere up the hill, a woman he didn't know had written his name in a journal, though neither of them yet knew how that simple act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. 2 days passed, and the cold showed no sign of mercy. Halston Ridge was the kind of town where winter didn't just knock. It came in, took off its boots, and settled in the living room. Most folks had fireplaces, wool socks, and pantries stocked with canned soup. Liam Carter had resolve, 2 growing children, and a toolbox that served as both breadwinner and companion. That morning he was walking briskly along Main Street, toolbox in hand, on his way to fix a leaking sink for Mrs. Greaves. The snow had stopped, but the air still bit through layers. His scarf, the one gifted to him at the thrift shop, was wrapped tightly around his neck. As he passed St. Matthew's Church, something caught his eye. A sleek black SUV parked awkwardly at the curb, its hood popped open like a patient on an operating table. It wasn't the kind of vehicle that belonged on Halston Ridge's salt-streaked streets. Around here, luxury stood out like a cardinal in winter. He slowed. He didn't have time for detours. He was already running behind, and Mrs. Greaves was not a woman who tolerated tardiness. But then he saw her, the woman from the shop, the one who'd stood across the street days ago, cradling a coffee cup with both hands like it held more than just warmth. She was brushing snow off her coat sleeves and peering into the engine, like it might offer her directions. He crossed the street. "Having trouble?" he asked, tipping his head toward the vehicle. She straightened, startled but not unfriendly. "Battery, maybe. It just died." Her voice was smooth but tinged with uncertainty. Not fear, but unfamiliarity. "Mind if I take a look?" "Please. I don't know much beyond where to put the gas." Liam smiled faintly. "That's most of us, honestly." He leaned into the hood, fingers already probing cables and checking connections. Within moments, he found it. A loose terminal. Simple fix if you knew what to look for. He tightened it with a wrench from his bag, tapped the battery gently, then stepped back. "Try it now." She climbed behind the wheel and turned the key. The SUV rumbled to life on the first try. She looked up at him through the windshield, surprised and smiling. When she stepped out again, she extended a gloved hand. "Evelyn, and you are a miracle." "Liam," he replied, shaking her hand. "Not a miracle. Just good with bolts and cold mornings. I owe you one. You don't. Just glad I could help. At least let me buy you breakfast. Or coffee. It's the least I can do." Liam hesitated. Part of him wanted to say no. Pride, habit, the instinct to stay invisible. But her offer wasn't pity. It was genuine. "All right," he nodded. "There's a diner up the road." They walked together to Maple and Pine, the kind of place where every booth had a story and every waitress knew your usual. Inside, the scent of pancakes and home-cooked sausage floated in the air. Evelyn looked out of place but didn't act it. They took a corner booth. She ordered eggs and coffee. He just asked for hot chocolate, something he hadn't tasted in years but suddenly craved. The conversation started slow. Weather, small-town rhythms, how the snow blanketed everything like a clean slate. She asked about his kids, and he lit up. Told her about Ellie's drawings on the fridge and Finn's fascination with toy trucks that had long since lost their wheels. "Sounds like they keep you busy," she said, smiling. "They keep me grounded," he answered. "Some days that's more important." She didn't speak for a moment. Then softly, "I used to run a company. Big one. Now I'm not." Liam didn't flinch. "Sometimes stepping away is the bravest thing you can do." She stared at him, surprised. "Most people tell me I'm crazy." "You're not most people," he said simply. The waitress brought the check. Evelyn reached for it, but Liam beat her to it and laid down a few worn bills for the tip. "You paid for breakfast," he said. "This part's mine." As they stepped outside, the cold slapped them both back to reality. Evelyn paused at the curb. "Actually," she began, "I was wondering, I have this deck behind my cabin. It's in rough shape. Would you—" Liam didn't let her finish. "Give me the address. I'll stop by after Mrs. Greaves's sink." "You don't want to hear how bad it is first? I'll see it for myself. If it's beyond fixing, I'll say so." She laughed. "That's fair." He nodded, adjusted his scarf, and turned to leave. Evelyn stood there for a moment longer, watching him go. There was no swagger in his walk, no urgency, no pretense, just quiet steadiness, like a man who had nothing left to prove and everything left to protect. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew this. She wanted to see him again. Halston Ridge didn't hand out many awards, but it had a long memory. Here, people remembered who showed up, not for applause, but because it was the right thing to do. They remembered the man who fixed porch steps before an elderly neighbor slipped, who shoveled sidewalks before school let out, who brought soup to a sick friend even when his own pantry was bare. And Liam Carter, though he never once sought it, had earned himself a permanent place in that memory. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He simply was. By the time Liam had finished the second day of repairs on Evelyn's cabin deck, word had already spread. In Halston Ridge, word traveled faster than winter wind. It wasn't cruel gossip. This town didn't trade in malice, but curiosity and sometimes hope. Folks talked in hushed tones at the post office, at the diner, outside the church. "You know she hired Liam? That woman from out of town? She's different, but seems kind. He looked lighter yesterday, happier." Meanwhile, Evelyn sat on the edge of the newly repaired deck, bundled in a thick throw blanket, cradling a mug of tea that smelled of cinnamon and orange peel. She watched as Liam bent over the wood, pencil behind his ear, hands moving with calm certainty. Sawdust clung to his sleeves like snowflakes, and she found herself oddly comforted by it. "You're good at this," she said casually. "Thank you. I used to think fixing things was a metaphor," she mused. Liam didn't look up. "It can be, but metaphors don't hold up porch steps." Evelyn laughed quietly. "You always this practical? With wood, always. With people." He paused, then smirked. "Trying to be." There was something about the way he answered, measured, not guarded, just real, that made her stomach feel unexpectedly light. After a while, he packed up his tools. The sun was slipping behind the ridge, painting the sky a soft indigo, and Evelyn followed him out to his old truck. "I know I'm technically just passing through," she began, "but can I ask something personal?" He gave a small shrug. "You can ask. Why stay? You're clearly smart, skilled. You could make better money elsewhere." Liam leaned against the truck bed, staring out at the hills draped in snow. "My wife loved this place," he said, his voice quieter now. "She grew up here. We planned to raise the kids here together. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to leave. It still feels like she's here in a way. In the trees, the air. And I guess I wanted our kids to grow up surrounded by the kind of people she believed in." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She didn't want to break the spell of his honesty, but something shifted in her chest. Not pity, never pity. It was something more like reverence. That night, long after Liam had gone and her tea had turned cold, Evelyn found herself standing in front of the community board at the library. She hadn't planned on stopping, just wanted to return a book, but her eyes caught on a yellowed flyer taped beside an ad for snow tires. "Nominations open. Father of the Week. Share your story at the front desk." She stood there a long time. Then, pulling out a pen from her coat pocket, she filled out the card beneath it. No name, just words. The next morning, Liam walked into Maple and Pine before heading to the elementary school to fix a loose railing on the playground. He expected nothing more than a quick cup of coffee. Instead, he was met with applause. Actual applause. Patsy, the owner, was beaming as she held out a laminated piece of paper bordered in blue with snowflake stickers. "Father of the Week, Liam Carter. For kindness shown daily, jackets given selflessly, and pancakes flipped with love. Liam froze. What? What is this? You've been nominated, Patsy said, patting his arm. Anonymous, but heartfelt. She handed him a note tucked behind the certificate. Some men raise children, some raise communities. Thank you for doing both, quietly and with more grace than most kings. A friend. Liam read it twice. He didn't need a signature to know who had written it. He folded the note carefully and tucked it into his wallet, next to a photo of his wife. Across the street, Evelyn stood by her SUV, pretending to inspect a grocery list while watching through the diner window. She didn't want thanks, just wanted to see his face when the world, for once, looked back at him with the same grace he gave it. That afternoon, Liam came by with the final invoice for the deck. Handwritten, fair, and far lower than any contractor would have charged. Evelyn read it, smiled, then handed him an envelope in return. Inside were 2 gift cards, one for the town grocery store and one for the children's clothing boutique. No strings, she said before he could protest. Just kindness returned. Liam stared at them, unsure what to say. Gratitude sat heavy in his chest. I'm not used to being on the receiving end, he admitted. Maybe that's why you need it most, she replied gently. That night, in the small home that still creaked when the wind pushed too hard, Liam sat with the twins in his lap. Ellie showing him her latest drawing of Daddy fixing the world, and Finn nestled close, whispering stories to his stuffed lion. Up on the hill, Evelyn stood by her cabin window, gazing at the soft lights twinkling below. She hadn't expected to care this much about a man with calloused hands and gentle eyes. But somehow, between the planks of a wooden deck and the folds of a scarf once bartered for milk, something tender had begun to form, and it felt for the first time in a long while like the start of something real. The wind carried a different scent that morning. Not snow or smoke, but something fresher, like thawing earth beneath layers of frost. Though it was still technically winter, the promise of spring had begun whispering through the pines. Liam arrived at Evelyn's cabin just after sunrise, toolbox in hand, shoulders squared in a borrowed jacket a neighbor had loaned him. It was too short at the sleeves and a bit tight at the shoulders, but it kept the cold at bay. Evelyn met him behind the house, her coffee mug steaming, red lipstick bright against the soft beige of her sweater. Still on for the deck? She asked, her breath curling into the crisp morning air. Still standing, isn't it? He replied with a smile that reached his eyes. Their banter had become familiar, a quiet dance neither acknowledged out loud. Evelyn had started to look forward to the sound of his boots on the porch more than she cared to admit. Liam, for his part, had grown used to the scent of her tea, the gentle hum of her presence nearby while he worked. As Liam hammered in new planks and sanded rough edges, Evelyn lingered close. She sat on the steps with a book unopened in her lap, her gaze drifting toward him more often than the pages. When he took a break, she surprised him with lunch. 2 sandwiches, sliced apples, and a thermos of tomato soup. I thought you didn't cook, Liam teased, accepting the food with a curious glance. I don't, she admitted, but heating up a can counts when you're cold and trying. He gave her a mock salute with his sandwich. Counts more than you think. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. The sun peeked through the pines, casting warm light on the deck. Evelyn watched as Liam tilted his head back and closed his eyes for a moment, soaking in the rare warmth. You always this calm? She asked softly. I wasn't, he said without opening his eyes. Not before the kids. Not before I lost her. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't pry. But that single line carried an entire story, one that Evelyn had begun to piece together like a puzzle she didn't yet have all the edges for. Later, she led him around the side of the house to an old wooden footbridge that spanned a narrow creek. The boards were weathered, some warped, others cracked clean through. The railing leaned like it had given up trying to stay upright. Think it's salvageable? She asked. Liam ran his hand along the railing, his fingers pressing against soft rot. It's tired, he said, but with time and effort, yeah, it'll hold again. Like people, she murmured. He glanced at her, his gaze lingering. That one I'll let you keep, he said with a small smile. They worked on the bridge together that afternoon side by side. Liam showed her how to brace the planks and measure the angles, explaining as he went. Evelyn, surprisingly agile in borrowed work gloves, followed instructions without fuss. Her heels had been traded for hiking boots. Far more practical, she admitted, though far less stylish. There was a moment when their hands brushed, reaching for the same nail. Neither of them moved. Instead, they held there for a second longer than necessary, the contact unspoken but deeply felt. It was nothing and everything, all at once. By the time they called it a day, the sun was dipping low, and the repaired bridge stood steadier, stronger, just like the bond between them. As Liam packed up his tools, Evelyn stood with her hands in her coat pockets, suddenly unsure of her footing in this growing connection. Before he could get into his truck, she spoke. "Hey, there's a community bonfire this Friday, down by the lake. They said it's a town tradition, something about blessings for spring and burning wishes." Liam raised an eyebrow, amused. "You've been here a whole month and no one dragged you to one yet? That's practically a crime in Halston Ridge. I've been keeping to myself." She hesitated. "But I'd like to go this time, if you and the kids aren't busy." He looked at her, at the way her eyes didn't quite meet his, at the slight flush on her cheeks that wasn't entirely from the cold. "Yeah," he said slowly. "We'd like that." She smiled, and in that moment, she looked younger, lighter, more like a woman rediscovering something she thought she'd buried under years of boardrooms, strategy meetings, and solitude. Liam drove off with a quiet sense of anticipation curled in his chest. In the rearview mirror, Evelyn stood at the edge of her porch, hands still in her pockets, watching until his truck turned out of sight. And though the wind had picked up and the evening chill crept through the trees, she stayed there a moment longer, as if hoping that maybe, just maybe, something extraordinary was beginning to bloom beneath the frost. Friday arrived wrapped in wind and the scent of wood smoke. The townsfolk of Halston Ridge were already gathering down by the frozen lake, where the bonfire pit had been stacked high with logs and trimmed pine branches. Children darted between bundled-up adults, their laughter slicing through the cold like sunlight. Lanterns flickered around the clearing, casting a golden glow against the snow-packed earth. Liam pulled his old truck into the edge of the lot, parking beside a rusted red pickup that had seen better decades. Ellie and Finn were practically vibrating in the back seat, wrapped in their puffiest coats, hats askew and cheeks already rosy from excitement. "You said there'd be marshmallows," Finn reminded seriously. "There will be," Liam assured. "Just don't eat 5 in one go like last time." "I only had 4, Finn mumbled, which made Ellie giggle. Liam smiled, adjusted Ellie's scarf, and led them toward the firelight. He'd brought them here before, but this time felt different. Maybe it was the crispness of the night air. Maybe it was the glimmer of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. Or maybe it was because he saw her, Evelyn, standing near the fire, laughing with Patsy from the diner. Evelyn looked different in the firelight, warmer somehow, less composed. Her coat was simple wool, no designer label in sight, and her boots were scuffed from bridge work. Her hair was loose for the first time, falling in soft waves to her shoulders. When she saw Liam, her face lit up in a way that made something tighten in his chest. "You came," she said as they approached. "You invited us," he replied, as if that explained everything. She crouched and greeted the twins with ease, complimenting Ellie's glittery gloves and asking Finn about his favorite marshmallow technique. Liam watched her with mild amazement. She was graceful, yes, but not distant. There was something grounding about her presence, like a storm that had finally learned to settle. The fire cracked loudly as more people arrived. Folding chairs appeared from nowhere. Flasks were passed, and someone started a round of old folk songs that half the crowd knew by heart. Liam found himself sitting beside Evelyn, watching the twins toast marshmallows under the guidance of an elderly man with a cowboy hat and a guitar. For a while they didn't speak. They didn't need to. Eventually Evelyn glanced sideways and asked, "Do you miss her every day?" Liam didn't ask who she meant. He nodded slowly, not always with pain. "Sometimes just with silence. Sometimes I catch myself reaching for the phone to tell her something. Then remember. She must have been extraordinary." "She was," he said. "Smart, stubborn, funnier than me. And she saw things I didn't, believed in things I'd stopped believing in." Evelyn looked into the fire, eyes reflecting the flame. "I was supposed to get married last year." Liam turned toward her, surprised. She smiled faintly. "He was brilliant, handsome, said all the right things, until the prenup came. Then suddenly I was paranoid. He didn't love me. He loved the idea of me, or maybe just the empire. Liam's brows furrowed, not in judgment, but in empathy. That's not love. That's leverage. I walked away 3 weeks before the wedding, bought myself a ticket to Colorado the next day, came here to remember what real life looked like. Liam's voice was steady. And, remembering yet? I think so, she said, then added softer. You've helped. The fire popped loudly, sending a few sparks skyward. Across the way, Ellie had convinced Finn to dance in the snow, while someone strummed a gentle tune. Evelyn watched them for a long moment. I used to think being strong meant never needing help, she said. Most people do, Liam answered, until life shows you different. And now? Now I think strength is what lets you ask for help, what lets you stay when it's easier to run. Evelyn was quiet a long time. Then she reached for his hand, not urgently, not dramatically, just enough to let him know she was there. Liam didn't pull away. They sat that way, hand in hand, two people who had lost different things and still managed to find something quietly beautiful in the ashes. Not love yet, not quite, but the kind of safety love needs to grow. Later, as the fire burned low and people began to drift off into the night, Liam wrapped Ellie in his coat and hoisted a sleepy Finn onto his shoulder. Evelyn stood nearby, watching the soft way he cradled his son's head, his fingers instinctively smoothing Finn's hat as if to shield him from every cold wind in the world. You're a good father, she said. He met her eyes, tired but open. I try. You do more than try. The snow had begun to fall again, gentle and slow. It shimmered in the firelight, dusting Liam's hair like frost. Without thinking, Evelyn reached up and brushed it away. Liam's breath caught slightly, but he didn't move. Somewhere in the woods, an owl called out. A child giggled in her sleep, and for a moment, the entire world felt quiet enough to begin again. The following Monday began like any other. Quiet, cold, and slow to wake. Liam had just dropped the twins off at preschool and was heading to the hardware store for a new chisel when his phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, local, but something made him pick it up. Liam Carter? A man's voice asked. Speaking. This is Greg Downing. I'm with the town council, and also, well, part-time editor of the Halston Ridge Weekly. Liam blinked. Okay. I was wondering if you had any comment about the nomination. What nomination? A pause. For the Father of the Year article. You're on the cover next week. Someone submitted a letter and photo anonymously. Really moving stuff. It's already gone to print. Liam froze in the middle of the aisle between roofing nails and weatherproof caulk. Wait, the cover? Yep, big feature. We don't usually run stories like this, but the response has been incredible. Evelyn Whitmore's name alone has doubled our subscriptions. And just like that, the gears in Liam's mind ground to a halt. What did you say? I said, Ms. Evelyn Whitmore. She's the one who wrote the letter, didn't she? Liam didn't respond. He hung up without another word. Up on the hill, Evelyn was rinsing out coffee mugs when her assistant's voice echoed from the tablet lying on the kitchen island. We've had 3 acquisition offers since you disappeared. One of them is serious. If you're not ready to come back, we at least need a press release. Evelyn. Evelyn. She tapped the screen off. Her phone buzzed again. A local news alert. The digital edition of the Halston Ridge Weekly had dropped early. Evelyn opened the link absent-mindedly, her thoughts still caught between Liam and a possible board meeting she was trying to avoid. And then her breath caught. There he was, Liam, in a candid photo taken during the bonfire, holding Ellie in one arm while Finn slept on his shoulder. The firelight cast his face in warm amber, his expression caught somewhere between weariness and wonder. The headline read, Father of the Year, the quiet hero of Halston Ridge. Beneath it, in small but unmistakable print, letter submitted by Evelyn Whitmore, former CEO of Whitmore Organics. Her hands went cold. She hadn't signed her name. She'd been deliberate, careful. She had poured her heart into that letter anonymously. How had her name been printed? Before she could process more, a knock sounded at the door. She opened it to find Liam. His expression wasn't angry. Not exactly, but it was guarded, cautious in a way it hadn't been since the day they met. He held a folded copy of the paper in one gloved hand. "You're on the front page," she said softly. "So I hear." "I didn't put my name on it," she said quickly. "I swear, Liam. I wrote it, yes, but I wanted it anonymous. Someone else must have connected the dots." "I'm not mad about the article," he said, voice steady. "I'm mad I had to find out who you are from the paper." Evelyn's lips parted, but no sound came out. "I wasn't hiding from you," she said finally. "Not really." He shook his head. "You knew who I was from the first moment. You knew what I had, what I didn't. But I didn't know you. Not really. And I let you near my kids. That matters to me." She stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the wind. "I just wanted to be seen. As me. Not as a business. Not as a name." He looked at her. Really looked. And his eyes softened slightly. "I do see you, Evelyn. That's the thing. But honesty, that's all I've got left. And I need it to mean something." "I get it," she said, her voice quieter now. "I do. I didn't expect this to matter so much to me. Not you, not here, not this life." He exhaled slowly, his breath a visible plume between them. "I need some space," he said. "For now." And just like that, he turned and walked down the steps, the snow crunching under his boots like something breaking. That night, Evelyn sat on the couch with her laptop open but untouched. Emails blinked. Press inquiries stacked up. Her assistant had left 3 voicemails, one of which included the phrase, "Forbes cover story," and another that used the word empire again. But all Evelyn could think about was Liam's face when he turned away. She wasn't ashamed of who she was. She had built something meaningful, but somewhere along the way she had learned to hide it. Not out of humility, but self-defense. And now that defense had turned into a wall between her and the only person who had looked at her without asking what she was worth. Down in town, Liam tucked the twins into bed with a little less laughter and a little more quiet. Ellie asked if Miss Evelyn would be joining them for cocoa again. Finn wanted to show her his snow fort. Liam just said, "Not tonight." But when the house was still and the only sound was the hum of the old radiator, Liam reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the article again. He read the letter one more time. Even if the name had been printed by mistake, the words were hers, and somehow they still reached him. Snow fell gently over Halston Ridge, soft as ash and twice as silent. It had been 4 days since Liam walked away from Evelyn's cabin, and the space between them now stretched like an invisible fault line. She hadn't called. He hadn't come by. They moved like planets no longer in orbit, still existing under the same sky, but no longer drawn together. Liam kept busy, or at least pretended to. He took on extra handyman work, repairing a broken banister at the church, helping Mr. Dugan fix a leaky roof, even raking the brittle winter leaves that crunched like broken glass beneath his boots. He filled his time with motion, hoping it might muffle the stillness in his chest, but his rhythm was off. He laughed less, slept lighter. The twins felt it too. "Did Miss Evelyn go away?" Ellie asked one night as Liam tucked her in. "No, baby," he said softly. "She's just taking time." Ellie frowned. "But we liked her." "I know," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Me too." She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "Did she stop liking us?" Liam paused. "No, she didn't stop anything. Some grown-ups just get scared sometimes." Ellie seemed to accept that answer. Or maybe she didn't understand enough to argue. Either way, she curled into her pillow, and Liam sat beside her longer than usual, just to make sure she drifted off without tears. Up the hill, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table of her rented cabin, staring at an email she hadn't answered for 3 days. The subject line read, "Urgent, final offer for acquisition." She could sign it, hand over the company she built from scratch to a larger conglomerate that would honor her vision while quietly sanding down its soul. It would make her richer, give her time, distance, maybe even buy her peace. But it would also mean giving up one more part of herself, something she was growing tired of doing. She closed the laptop with a soft click and looked around the quiet cabin. There were reminders of Liam everywhere. The worn sanding block he'd left behind, The bridge tool sketch she still kept on the counter, the way the floor creaked differently now, like the house remembered him too. The silence pressed in on her. She stood, walked to the window and looked out toward the bridge. The one they had rebuilt, one plank at a time. It had held through the last snow, steady and solid. It bore weight now. She missed his voice, his steadiness, the way he never filled silences with empty words. She missed all of it more than she'd thought possible. The next morning, Evelyn walked into town for the first time since the article. No driver, no pretense. Just boots, gloves, and a wool coat dusted with snow. The townspeople recognized her, but to their credit, they didn't gawk. A few nodded politely. Some offered kind smiles. A little boy waved and shouted, "You're the marshmallow lady!" She smiled and waved back. At Maple and Pine, Patsy raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as Evelyn ordered coffee and took a corner booth. She didn't expect anyone to join her, but someone did. Mrs. Halberd, the elderly owner of the thrift store, slid into the seat across from her without invitation. "You bought his jacket, didn't you?" Evelyn blinked. "Excuse me?" 2 months ago, brown leather, worn at the shoulders. Man traded it for enough cash to buy milk and bread. I gave him a scarf and $20 and watched a part of his heart walk out the door. Evelyn swallowed. "I was across the street that day." Mrs. Halberd studied her a moment. "And you didn't step in?" "No," Evelyn admitted. "I watched. I wanted to see who he was when no one was looking." "Eshtcha," the old woman nodded slowly, her tone gentler now. "And what did you see?" "A man who gave up warmth so his kids wouldn't go hungry," Evelyn said. "A man who didn't curse the cold, just walk through it." "Then maybe," Mrs. Halberd said, rising slowly, "it's time you stopped watching." That afternoon, Liam returned home to find a small box on his porch. Inside, his old jacket, freshly cleaned and carefully stitched at the seams. Folded neatly on top was a card. "Some things are worth restoring. I'm sorry. Evelyn." Underneath the card, tucked inside the pocket, was a photo, the one from the article, printed on glossy paper. But this copy had a handwritten note on the back. "I didn't mean for you to find out that way," but every word was true. Liam held the photo a long time. Then quietly he slipped the jacket on. It didn't fit the way it used to. It was tighter across the chest, softer at the elbows. But it still held warmth and memory. And something else too. The weight of forgiveness. He stood there on the porch for a long moment, snow beginning to gather on his shoulders. Then he walked inside and closed the door behind him. Up on the hill, Evelyn was standing on the bridge again, watching the creek begin to thaw beneath a film of early spring melt. The sky was low and pale, the air still crisp. But something was shifting. You could hear it in the drip of water, the soft crack of ice loosening its grip on the stones. She thought of Liam's face, the feel of his hand in hers, the look in his eyes the night he had walked away. She didn't know if he would come, but she had built the bridge. She had left the door open, and sometimes that had to be enough. The first sign that something had changed was a knock at the school's front office. It was Thursday morning, and Liam had just finished repairing a broken locker hinge in the elementary hallway when the school secretary flagged him down with a soft, uncertain smile. "Mr. Carter, someone left this for you," she said, handing him a brown paper bag sealed with a piece of red string. "Said to give it to you when you had a free moment." He nodded, accepting the bag, then stepped outside and sat on the stone bench beneath the snow-heavy pine tree in front of the school. The sky was pale with morning light, and the snow still clung to the branches like fragile lace. Inside the bag was a thermos, metal, clean, still warm, and a folded note tucked neatly beside it. "Thought you might be cold. No speeches, no signatures, just soup. E." Liam read the note twice. The corners of his mouth lifted just slightly, not into a full smile, but something softer, something forgiving. He didn't take it as a plea for absolution. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was something. And right now, something was a lot more than nothing. He unscrewed the lid and let the steam rise, breathing in the familiar scent. Lentil with smoked paprika. It was the kind of small detail he hadn't expected her to remember, but somehow she had. The soup was warm, rich, grounding, and so was the memory it carried. That evening, Evelyn stood by the large picture window of her rented cabin, her arms folded loosely, watching the town below slowly light itself one home at a time. String lights flickered on front porches, chimneys puffed steady smoke, and laughter drifted faintly from a house where children were clearly chasing bedtime. She didn't miss the spotlight. She missed the ordinary. She missed Liam's voice when he read bedtime stories, the way Finn fell asleep mid-sentence, and Ellie's constant questions about the stars. She missed the quiet strength of the man who fixed things with hands that never asked for thanks. She'd been powerful for a long time, but she hadn't felt strong like that, like him, in years. She didn't want a boardroom back. She wanted a kitchen where the coffee pot was always half full, a hallway where socks got lost and found again. A garden maybe, or just a porch with 2 chairs and someone worth sitting beside. She wanted a life that meant something. 2 days passed, then 3, and on Saturday morning, Evelyn returned to Maple and Pine. The bell above the door jingled gently as she stepped inside. Familiar warmth and the smell of syrup and cinnamon met her like a soft welcome. She wasn't sure what she expected. Stares, whispers maybe, but the regulars just nodded. Patsy looked up from behind the counter and gave her a small wave. Evelyn smiled back and took a corner booth. The waitress approached without fanfare. "French toast and coffee?" "Yes, please." "You got it, hun." 10 minutes passed. She sipped her coffee slowly, let it linger on her tongue. The sun poured through the frosted window, catching dust in the air like floating gold. She didn't expect him to walk in. So when the door opened and Liam stepped inside, hair tousled by the wind, cheeks pink from the cold, her heart stuttered before it settled. He didn't look surprised to see her. He just walked to her table and sat down. "You made it back," he said quietly. "I never really left," she replied. For a while they didn't say much else. The silence between them had grown familiar. Not empty, just spacious enough for healing to breathe. Then Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded note. She didn't hand it to him right away. She just set it on the table between them, like something sacred. "I was going to mail it," she said, "but if I'm going to be real, I might as well be brave." Liam unfolded the paper. "You saw me when I was trying not to be seen, and still you stayed, until I didn't let you. If you ever feel like coming back, I'm done hiding." He read it slowly. When he looked up, his eyes held something quiet and searching. "I don't know how to do this with someone who lives in a different world," he said. There was no accusation in his voice, only truth. "Then maybe," she said softly, "we make a new one, somewhere in the middle." The waitress arrived with her French toast and coffee refill. Liam ordered nothing. He just sat there, his hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug she'd pushed toward him. After a long moment, he reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold from walking. His were calloused, warm, and steady, and together they just held. That afternoon, they walked through town side by side, not with declarations or hand-holding, but with the kind of easy rhythm people develop when they've already chosen each other. Quietly, without ceremony. They passed the school, the thrift store, the bridge they had built together. The wood had darkened in the weather, but it held strong beneath their feet. Liam paused at the railing and looked out across the creek. "You fixed more than you broke, you know," he said. Evelyn turned to him. "So did you." No one clapped. No one cheered. But Evelyn didn't need applause anymore, and Liam had never wanted it. All they needed was this: the sound of thawing water, the promise of a second spring, and the knowledge that even in a town small enough to remember everything, forgiveness still flowed quietly under the snow. Evelyn stood at the edge of the elementary school's playground, watching Liam tighten bolts on the jungle gym, while Finn ran circles around his legs and Ellie helped sort screws by size with an intensity usually reserved for national security briefings. It was a Saturday morning warm enough to hint at spring. The snow was melting in patches, revealing soggy earth and the broken promises of old grass. The town had organized a small fix-it day, volunteers mending picnic benches, repainting signs, and hauling trash from walking trails. Evelyn hadn't planned to attend, but when Ellie called that morning and asked, "Will you come help Daddy fix things?" there hadn't been much question left. Now she stood in jeans and a worn flannel, her hair tied back, a smear of white paint on her cheek from touching a half-finished fence post. She looked real, approachable, happy, and Liam noticed. "You missed a spot," he said with a smile, nodding at the paint. She smirked. "I thought I'd leave room for character." He looked at her, longer this time. "You're different lately." "Different how?" "Less polished, more present." "I think I like her better," she said softly. "Me too." They worked side by side under a pale sun, mending what could be mended, letting silence settle in where words once had to fill the gaps. The kids ran back and forth, joining other volunteers, a few familiar faces from town, all wrapped in the quiet purposefulness of community work. As the kids dashed off toward the sandbox, Evelyn picked up a hammer and joined Liam at the base of the slide. They worked quietly for a while, the kind of quiet that fills up with ease rather than tension. "I've been thinking," she said eventually. "Dangerous," he teased. She nudged his arm. "I've spent the last 10 years talking in boardrooms, building things with words and numbers, convincing people to believe in ideas. But this," she gestured toward the schoolyard, the children, the rusted metal made strong again. "This feels like it matters more." He didn't answer right away. Just tightened one last bolt, wiped his hands and said, "That's because it does." They packed up the tools together and walked the kids to the nearby diner for cocoa and cinnamon rolls. Ellie and Finn took the booth seat by the window and pressed their faces to the glass, creating foggy patches to draw on. Liam stirred his coffee. "You didn't have to come today." "I wanted to," Evelyn said, then paused. "Also, I wanted to give you something." From her coat pocket, she pulled a small envelope and slid it across the table. Liam looked at it but didn't open it. "What is it?" "A job offer." His brows lifted. "For me?" "For both of us, sort of." He opened the envelope and scanned the single-page letter inside. It was a proposal, not from Whitmore Organics, but from something new, a community-based nonprofit dedicated to food sustainability, job training, and family support services, beginning right there in Halston Ridge. She'd already bought the old feed store building to convert into a center. "I want you to run the repair program," she said. "Teach woodworking, basic home maintenance, life skills, real ones. You'd decide the structure, the projects, the pace, and you'd get paid well to do it." Liam set the letter down. "You bought the feed store?" "I didn't buy it. I repurposed it." He chuckled. "You're really not going back, are you?" Evelyn took a sip of her tea. "No, I thought I would. I thought I had to. But now I know. I don't want a life that needs press releases to feel real." He looked at her, trying to find the catch. "There's no angle here," she said. "Just something that matters. Something that needs hands like yours." He tapped the envelope. "This is more than I expected. Does that scare you?" "A little," he admitted. She smiled. "Me too." Finn interrupted by sneezing directly onto his cinnamon roll. Ellie shrieked in mock horror. The moment broke into easy laughter, the kind that belongs to people who know they're allowed to be messy together. Later, as they walked toward the truck, Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a tiny box. "I wasn't sure if I should give this now or later," she said. Liam opened it. Inside was a simple key attached to a tag that read, "Workshop door yours." "I figure if we're building something new," she said, "you ought to have a key to open it." He held the key for a long second, then slid it into his jacket pocket. "Let's build it slow," he said, "but let's build it." And she nodded. Not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But when their hands brushed as they loaded the twins into the truck, neither pulled away. The clouds had started to clear by the time they reached the edge of town, revealing a streak of blue sky overhead. Sunlight broke through in scattered rays, lighting up the mountaintops like something sacred. And as the engine hummed to life and the road opened ahead, Evelyn thought, "This isn't a return. This is a beginning." The snow had almost fully melted by the time the town's spring market opened its gates. The annual event wasn't flashy, just booths lined with fresh bread, handmade soaps, quilts, and children's crafts. But for Halston Ridge, it was tradition. Liam stood beside a folding table, helping Ellie arrange her hand-painted birdhouses while Finn made a mess of the price tags. Nearby, Evelyn knelt to adjust a crooked sign that read, Whitmore Community Workshop, coming this summer. It was the first time she'd allowed her name on anything since she stepped away from her company. No logos, no slogans, just her name, hand-lettered in blue paint. Looks good, Liam said, coming to stand beside her. I had help, she replied, brushing sawdust off her jeans. Your daughter is the real creative director. He smiled and watched as Ellie gave a stern sales pitch to a confused couple, eyeing a polka dot birdhouse shaped like a taco. She gets that from her mom, he said softly. Evelyn glanced sideways. You talk about her more now. I've always talked about her. You're just listening closer. They wandered past booths and kids' art displays, stopping occasionally to greet neighbors. People were no longer curious about the woman who'd once been a corporate powerhouse. In Halston Ridge, she was now just Evelyn, the one who helped rebuild the bridge, painted fences with the school kids, and taught a baking class at the library last week, even if the muffins had turned out like bricks. It wasn't reinvention, it was return. They sat together on a low stone wall that overlooked the lake. It shimmered under the noon sun, framed by the last patches of snow and the early bloom of crocuses along the edges. A breeze carried the scent of warm soil, cinnamon buns, and wood smoke from a vendor grilling sausages nearby. You're quiet today, Evelyn said. Liam looked out at the water. Been thinking. Dangerous, she echoed, and he chuckled. About us, he said, more serious now. She turned toward him, fully. I've tried to build my life around what I could carry, he said. Keep it simple. Keep it safe. But you've brought color back into it. A kind I didn't think I'd ever see again. Her eyes shimmered, but she said nothing. I know things aren't clean-cut with you, he added. I know you still get calls from people who think you owe them things, that you've walked away from a world most people would kill to live in. But you walked toward something too. I see that now. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. She blinked. Déjà vu. He handed it to her. Your turn. Inside was a photo. The three of them, Evelyn, Liam, and Ellie, standing in front of the almost finished workshop. Ellie was holding a hammer. Evelyn's smile was wide. Liam's hand rested on her back. On the back of the photo, in Liam's handwriting, were just 4 words. Stay, if you want. Evelyn stared at the message. She didn't cry, but something inside her stilled. She looked at him and asked quietly, Is this the part where you ask me to move in? Liam smiled, lopsided. No. She tilted her head. No? This is the part where I ask you to stay in our lives, in our mess, in our small, beautiful world that doesn't need to be big to matter. She folded the photo carefully and held it to her chest. You're not afraid anymore, she said. I'm terrified, he replied, but I've learned that fear is a lot quieter when you're standing next to someone brave. The market buzzed around them. Laughter, deals struck over jars of honey, kids tugging parents toward pony rides. But in that small moment, it felt like the world had paused long enough for something true to take root. You know, Evelyn said, I used to believe my worth lived in my ambition, the titles, the boardrooms. But now I think, maybe my worth lives in where I choose to show up, and who I show up for. You keep showing up, Liam said gently. That's more than enough. They didn't kiss. Not yet. Not here. Not where so many others had once tried and failed to make grand things feel real. Instead, Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. I want to be here when we hang the sign, she said. You will be. And when the first kid builds something awful and proud and uneven, I'll frame it. And when Ellie learns how to use the table saw and terrifies us both. She already asked if she can have her own drill. They laughed, low, real, easy. Then Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a tiny box. I wasn't sure if I should give this now or later, she said. Liam opened it. Inside was a second key. Simple. Brass. Clean. The side door, she said. To the office. Figured if I'm staying in, I should have a way to unlock it too. He took the key, turned it over once, then closed his hand around hers. They sat with knees touching, hands clasped in quiet solidarity. And between them, above the thawing lake, beneath the late March sun, lived something not quite loud enough to be called love yet, but steady enough to be everything that came before it. The skies had threatened rain all morning, but that didn't stop the entire town of Halston Ridge from gathering on the green for the spring dedication festival. Picnic blankets dotted the grass, children held homemade pinwheels, and vendors lined the street with lemonade, hand pies, and hand-painted signs welcoming the new season. But the real focus of the day was the building just off Main Street, the old feed store, now transformed and humming with purpose. Freshly painted in warm amber and sage tones, the windows gleamed beneath the gray sky, and a carved wooden sign hung under a tarp waiting to be revealed. Whitmore Community Workshop. It was more than a name. It was a commitment, a home for broken things to become whole again, and a second chance for those who never thought they'd have one. Inside, Liam stood by the main workbench, brushing sawdust off his jeans. His hands were stained with varnish, and there was a small nick on his thumb from finishing the window trim that morning. He looked tired, but the kind of tired that came from building something with your hands and with your heart. "You ready?" Evelyn asked, appearing in the doorway, her coat unbuttoned and damp from the mist outside. A few strands of hair had slipped free, curling at her temples. "Almost," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Sign goes up in 10. "Looks good in here," she said, stepping inside. Her eyes scanned the rows of tools, the fresh pine smell, the long row of wood cubbies waiting for their first student projects. "Feels like it was always supposed to be this." "It is good," he replied. "Real. Grounded." They stood in a pocket of silence for a moment, the kind that's born not from absence, but fullness. Then Evelyn pulled a small velvet box from her coat pocket. "I've been carrying this for a while," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Liam turned to her, brows slightly raised. "I wasn't sure when would be the right moment, or if there was such a thing, but then I realized, sometimes the moment doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real." She opened the box. Inside was a simple band, brushed silver, modest, elegant. His breath caught. "Evelyn, I'm not asking you to marry me today," she said quickly, though her voice cracked on the last word. "I'm just asking if I can be the one who walks beside you, when you're ready, however long it takes." The rain began just then, soft at first, a rhythmic tapping on the roof, as though the sky itself had been holding its breath and finally let go. Liam took the box, looked down at the ring, then at her. "You already are," he said. He closed the box gently and slipped it into his pocket, then reached for her hands. They were cold, a little trembling, but familiar now. Grounding. "You know, this town, this life, it's not glamorous. I'm not looking for glamorous. It's unpredictable, messy, sometimes loud, sometimes lonely." She smiled, eyes soft. "So am I. And the kids, I love them," she said simply. "All in." Liam exhaled, a laugh tangled in disbelief. "You're really not afraid of anything, are you?" "I am," she said, "but I believe in what we've built." Just then, Ellie came bounding in through the side door, her braids bouncing, cheeks pink from excitement. Finn trailed behind, clutching a string attached to what had once been a balloon. "Daddy, Miss Evelyn, they're about to hang the sign." Liam and Evelyn stepped outside under the awning, just as the mayor climbed a stepladder. A small crowd gathered in the street below, umbrellas sprouting like spring flowers. The mayor counted down from 5. When the tarp was pulled free, the words "Whitmore Community Workshop" stood proudly above the double doors. Applause broke out across the green, and then the sky opened. Rain fell in earnest. Not a drizzle, but a warm, soaking spring shower that had half the crowd running for cover and the other half dancing like it was part of the celebration all along. Evelyn stood beneath the awning, blinking up at the downpour. Then, without hesitation, she stepped into it. She laughed, spinning in the rain, arms stretched out like a child. Her hair darkened and stuck to her cheeks. Her coat clung to her, but she didn't care. Liam watched her, something catching in his throat. She wasn't the CEO in heels anymore. She was the woman who'd stood by his children, painted fences in borrowed jeans, and offered him a ring not for show, but for truth. With a deep breath, he walked into the rain. He reached her in 2 steps, their fingers brushing, then clasping. She turned, surprised, then grinning, wide and free. They stood forehead to forehead, soaked to the skin, and utterly unconcerned. And then he kissed her, not because it was time, but because it was right. All around them, children laughed, bells chimed from the festival stand, and the earth seemed to exhale, the first full breath after a long-held silence. It wasn't the end. It wasn't even the beginning. It was the place in between, where healing becomes home and love becomes real. By June, Halston Ridge was in bloom. The hills turned a deep green, and wildflowers painted the fields in strokes of lavender, gold, and blush. The air was sweeter, softer, as if the whole town had exhaled after a long, quiet winter. Life moved a little slower now, not because there was less to do, but because the people had learned to savor it. At the corner of Main and Sycamore, the Whitmore Community Workshop had become more than a building. It was a rhythm, a heartbeat. Inside, the smell of fresh wood mingled with coffee and the occasional crayon. Mornings began with music and laughter. Kids built lopsided shelves and uneven picture frames, their proud grins bigger than the projects themselves. Teens learned to change oil and fix lamps. Parents met over shared tools and stayed to talk about more than just hinges and glue. Liam Carter stood near the main workbench, watching Ellie teach Finn how to use a measuring tape. She spoke with such focus it made him chuckle. Finn wasn't measuring anything in particular, but he looked like he was preparing to build a cathedral. Across the room, Evelyn was pinning up thank you cards on the corkboard, tiny notes in crooked handwriting from students, neighbors, and curious travelers who'd stumbled in and left lighter. She caught Liam's gaze and smiled. He walked over, kissed the top of her head, and said, "You make this place better." "You're the heart of it," she replied, leaning back into him. It was a quiet love, not loud, not showy, but steady, the kind that slipped into the seams of everyday life and held it all together. That afternoon, the town hosted its first Fix and Feast, an idea Evelyn had pitched half-jokingly at a council meeting. Liam had endorsed it before she even finished explaining. People brought broken things and warm dishes. While one group re-glued chair legs and rewired antique lamps, the other passed around chili, sliced watermelon, and swapped recipes that had no measurements but always turned out right. No one left hungry, and no one left empty-handed. Toward sunset, Liam stood with Evelyn beneath the string lights that draped across the porch. Fireflies blinked like slow sparks in the tall grass. Finn had fallen asleep in a hammock made from old cargo netting. Ellie was showing off her new toolbox to anyone who'd listen, including the mayor, who promised to name a park bench after her if she kept up the good work. "You think she'll be a builder like you?" Evelyn asked. "She already is," Liam said. "Just hasn't realized how good she's going to be." They leaned into each other as the laughter of children and neighbors floated in the soft twilight. Somewhere behind them, an old radio played something slow and bluegrass-tinged, blending into the breeze. Evelyn grew quiet, watching the lights, the people, the easy joy of it all. "I used to think success was a number," she said, "a target, something sharp and impressive." "And now?" Liam asked. "Now it's this," she said. "The smell of sawdust, a drawer that doesn't stick, a child who feels proud, a man who taught me how to love again without asking for anything in return." Liam slipped his arm around her waist. "I didn't teach you," he said. "You just remembered." They stood there for a long time, the kind of stillness that only comes when there's nothing left to prove and everything left to enjoy. Then Evelyn pulled something from her jacket pocket, the ring. It was simple, brushed silver, catching the porch light like a secret. "Think I could finally put this somewhere safe?" she teased, holding it out between two fingers. Liam looked at her, and for a moment, he didn't speak. He just reached for her hand, took the ring, and slipped it onto her finger. No grand speeches, no flash bulbs, no pedestal. Just a promise made quietly, under string lights and stars, with the scent of warm pine and wood smoke in the air. The guests began to head home, offering hugs, handshakes, and promises to come back next weekend. One by one, the lights dimmed. Doors clicked shut. Children were carried home half asleep, still clutching cookies or painted trinkets. And in the hush that followed, Liam and Evelyn stood at the edge of the porch, hands intertwined, watching the stars rise above the ridgeline. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day?" she asked. All the time, he said, turning toward her. She smiled softly. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten out of the car. He nodded. We would have missed this. But we didn't. No, Liam said, his voice low and full. We didn't. And with that, they stepped back inside their little workshop, a place born from second chances and stubborn hope, where light spilled onto wooden floors and love lived quietly. Not in the spotlight, not in headlines, but in the gentle hum of shared work, the creak of old floors beneath new feet, and the warmth of his heart, the kind that made you believe that maybe, just maybe, the best stories begin with a simple act of kindness. It was never about the jacket. It was always about the man who gave, without knowing who was watching, and the woman who stayed, because what she found was worth more than anything she'd ever built. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? And what part of this story touched your heart the most? If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that remind us what truly matters. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. We're truly grateful to have you here. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the goodness of people.